I'm Jude, I'm a queer man in my mid-30s, and in an attempt to remind myself that life really actually is worth living, I've bought a house in the middle of nowhere and moved to the Scottish countryside. I brought the last carload of my possessions up from Fife yesterday, and the sale of my old house went through this morning, so I officially live here in the middle of the rural Aberdeenshire countryside, and it is the start of a brand new chapter of my life, and I am very excited about it. To celebrate the fact that I live here now, and because it seems like a good place to kick off this YouTube channel, I thought I'd take you on a tour of the property. I will share a video of the inside of the cottage in the next couple of weeks, but today, as the sun's out, I'm going to take you on a walk around the property and the outbuildings. We'll call them outbuildings. They're sheds, but we'll call them outbuildings. I had a pretty specific set of requirements while I was house hunting. I wanted a detached house with no direct neighbours, and I didn't want to be too close to a main road, which is quite tricky when you're looking at houses in rural areas because there aren't that many roads. So you're either on a really busy road that's national speed limit, or you're down a really difficult to get down track. And I looked at a couple of houses that would have been completely impassable if there was any kind of weather at all. One of the houses I looked at was 15 minutes down a forestry track from the nearest road. Not even the nearest main road, the nearest road. So it was kind of hard to strike a sort of happy balance of possible to access all times of year and not right next to like a high speed connection. I also wanted outside space, which was probably the biggest thing on my house shopping list. Initially, I was looking at houses with acreage, and I viewed houses with 3 acres, with 10 acres, but none of them were quite right. It is quite hard to find a house with land in the UK where the house isn't enormous. If you want land in the UK, usually you have to have money to go with it. And I couldn't afford like an 8-bedroomed mansion, and I didn't want one either. The goal with this house is to eventually try and be as self-sufficient and as off-grid as I can be, and I think trying to heat an 8-bedroomed house off-grid would be pretty tricky. So even if it was in my budget, which it definitely wasn't, so I had to kind of sacrifice the acreage for this house. The house is on just under an acre, but it is surrounded by farmland and forests, so that kind of balances it out a little bit. So I'm surrounded by countryside even if I don't own it all, which, you know, you can't have everything. You have to compromise somewhere when you're buying a house, and this is the first place that I decided I liked. Like I knew it was the one before I'd even got out of the car when I came to view it. So I was prepared to compromise on the outside space. That being said, I have more outside space here than I have ever had in my life. And I could fit the garden of my previous house into this garden I don't know how many times. It is pretty sizable. I will show you a comparison of an area when I get to it. But without further ado, let's take a little bit of a tour of the property. Please excuse any ambient tractor noise in the background because they are mowing the fields. And yeah, I'll take ambient tractor noise over cars and loads of people having arguments in their back gardens. First up, we have the barn, or the byre as it's called here, and it is attached to the house. Eventually, the barn will be converted into extra living space as part of a big renovation project on the house, but for the moment it is just overspill storage space from one of my sheds. There's lots of decorating supplies in here at the moment. Originally, this was 3 separate rooms. The walls have been knocked down by the previous owners who were going to do a conversion on the property, which I will eventually be doing when I've reapplied for planning permission. The footprint of the barn is the same as the main cottage, so eventually there will be double the amount of living space, which is pretty exciting. And the upstairs of the cottage will be moved into the barn. So that is quite far down the to-do list, as I have to get some surveys done and apply for the right permits and things before this project can even get started. Apart from the barn, there are 6 sheds on the property, not including a little greenhouse and a corrugated iron garage / carport. That being said, some of the sheds are in mixed conditions. Some of them have electricity, some of them don't. And some of them will be taken down and replaced, or just taken down and removed. And this one is one of the ones that I'm probably going to get rid of. Next to the shed is this carport and single garage kind of construction made of pretty much every different type of construction material you can get your hands on. There's stone, breeze blocks, timber, corrugated iron. There are multiple tree branches being used for braces for the roof in here. I don't know if I should really be parking my car in here, but I am, and it seems fairly solid so far. And the previous owners used it, and their car was fancier than mine, so... I'm excited to have a covered area to work on projects in. We get quite a lot of rain in Scotland, and the winter is pretty long, so it'll be nice to have somewhere that I can do projects that are kind of dusty and dirty, and I don't want to do in the house or necessarily in the workshop. Like sanding or spray painting and things that you'd have to rely on like dry weather, which is difficult to plan in Scotland. So it'll be a good space for some of those projects. I have a cupboard that needs restoring and it's going to need quite a lot of sanding, so that might be one of the first things I do in this space. This garage space is made from corrugated iron and potentially asbestos. I'm not entirely sure, but I know there is asbestos on the property, and I want to get a survey done just so that I know what materials I can drill into and or what ones I can't. This space is just going to be used for storage. There's a spare door for one of the rooms in the cottage in here. There's also a wheelbarrow and an assortment of other little bits and pieces. I think the previous owners stored their ride-on lawnmower in here. After all the expenses that come with moving, I can't afford a ride-on lawnmower, which is probably for the best. I don't know if anyone's ever been run over by their own ride-on lawnmower, but I feel like that's probably how I would die. There's a lot of cobwebs in here and quite a lot of old wasps' nests that don't appear to be active anymore. There's quite a lot of small wasps' nests on the property that I have removed so far, but I've just spotted a pretty large one in here, so I think I'm gonna make a hasty exit. Across from the garage we have these 2 sheds, but there is also a space that I forget about, which is this big grassy area behind me. This space here is the smallest of the lawn areas on the property, and it is easily bigger than my entire garden at my last house. Most of the property is laid to lawn at the moment, and that is something I am planning to change. I don't actually have a plan for this grassy space. It is next to the drive and it's pretty shaded. The main reason I wanted as much outdoor space as I could get my hands on was I'm planning on starting a backyard homestead. I want to be as self-sufficient and self-reliant as possible, so I'm going to be planting some garden beds for vegetables. I'm going to be planting some fruit trees. I'm planning on getting chickens, and I needed space to do all of those things. I managed to do quite a lot of vegetable growing in my tiny urban garden in the last house, but I maximized the amount of things I could grow in containers. So I'm really excited to have a bigger outside space. And there was no possibility of chickens or any kind of livestock at the last house. So that is something that I will definitely be changing here. Originally, I think this shed was built for ducks or chickens or some kind of poultry, but for now it's holding overflow possessions that won't fit in the house as it's pretty watertight. And I've also noticed a collection of large dead wasps' nests. So it's on brand with all of the other sheds on the property. This is going to be my workshop. I haven't unpacked it or organised it yet, but it is pretty sizable. I'm sure there are people on YouTube building tiny homes that are this kind of size, so it'll be a great workshop size space. At the moment, I'm storing all of my tools in it and the tools I inherited from my dad. As well as being a pretty good size, this space has lights, power, and is pretty watertight. So I'm using it to store my freezer and my tumble dryer, as there isn't space for either of those in the house. I've just bought this vertical chest freezer to go in here because there isn't space for a freezer in the house, and I thought it's probably good to have as much freezer space as possible, partly for preserving some of the things I am planning on growing, and also in case it's hard to get to the supermarket in the winter when the weather gets colder, or if there's a storm and I get cut off. So that's my first big purchase for the house. Have I replaced the oven yet? No. So I can't cook anything unless I'm cooking it on the hob, but I do have a good freezer now, so small steps. I'm not sure what's going on in here. Your guess is as good as mine. I don't know why all of the walls are lined with this orange corrugated plastic. I don't really want to think about it too much. The floor in here is pretty rotten, so I'm probably going to pull this down and maybe repurpose some of the wood. The wood on the roof looks like it's in pretty good condition, and make a compost bin set up out of it, because waste not, want not, and I'm a compost nerd. There's an assortment of logs and firewood next to the scary orange shed. And along here is where I am planning to build my composting system, which I will make a video about when I get to it. The area behind the garage and behind the house is on a pretty steep slope, and as far as I can tell wasn't used for anything apart from this burn pile here. And I will probably have this area as space for chickens to free range, because I think it will be a difficult space to do anything else with. Although, potentially, if I could level out enough space to put a polytunnel up here, it would get a lot of light. Behind the house and the barn, there's a retaining wall, there's a lot of weeds, there's an old gate, the exterior boiler and the oil tank are all back here because the house isn't on mains gas. It's my first time with oil central heating, which is going to be an adjustment. It's also my first time not on mains water. So again, that's going to be something I have to get used to. I need to change a part on the water pump this afternoon so that the alarm stops going off. But the people at the shop assured me that it was a straightforward job that I will be able to do. So we'll see. Famous last words. At the front of the house, there is a little patio area. Please excuse the fact that there's a dishwasher here. The previous owners left it behind, and I couldn't fit my washing machine in the kitchen with a dishwasher there. So that needs to be recycled, and it's out here until I organise a collection for it. It's a good place to sit outside, to watch the birds on the bird feeder, to watch the cows when they're in the field. I'm getting more and more middle-aged by the minute. I think my parents would be proud of me. And at some point I'm going to get a barbecue as well, and I'll be able to cook out here too. And eventually, when I do all of the work on the house, the kitchen area that you can see behind me, this lean-to area, will be knocked down, and I'm going to build a patio, probably with like a covered pergola, I don't know how you pronounce that word, over the top. And there's also going to be sort of a covered area. The roof's going to come down a little bit further, and there'll be a covered area, so hopefully I'll be able to sit outside even when it's raining and enjoy the outside space, which is one of my favorite things to do. This greenhouse was left by the previous owners and it's in mixed condition. It had a few panes of glass missing, but I had a friend visiting last week and she helped me gaffer tape in some sheets of perspex into the gaps. So it should be a fully functioning space when I need it to start seeds early next year, and I will probably be able to grow some warmer weather crops in here, get a good tomato harvest hopefully, and get some peppers and chilies in here as well. It's got a vent which will be useful, and yeah, no, I had a greenhouse before, so I'm quite excited about it. Eventually I have big plans to build my own greenhouse, but again, I'm only one person and I can only do so many things at once. So this will definitely get at least a season's worth of use. Next to the greenhouse is another garden shed. This is probably 6x4. It's got a potting bench under the window and it's got racks behind me that I've hung some of my garden tools on. I did a pretty thorough clean out of this space a few days ago because it was home to a lot of bug corpses, and now it is one of the cleaner sheds. There are no more dead wasps' nests in here, and it'll be a great place to pot up seedlings and start seeds when the weather is horrible outside, and I can just transfer them into the greenhouse to grow. So I am ridiculously excited about all of this outside space. I used to pot up seeds on my kitchen table and get soil everywhere, so it'll be great to have a purpose-built space for it. The last shed is potentially the prettiest. It's got a barn door and like a fancy gable end, and I think might have once been home to some kind of animal because it's in this sort of paddock space that is kind of fenced off and has like a proper gate at one side. So who knows? I am not really planning on livestock beyond chickens. I know quite a lot of people have goats, but I'm not sure I have enough space for goats, and I know they escape quite a lot, and also I don't know if I like goat's milk. So I mean, that's an easy enough thing to check, but I feel like it'd be quite a lot of work. So this will probably be just a garden extension with more vegetables. The largest open space on the property is directly in front of the cottage, and this is where I'm planning to put raised beds. It's on a bit of a slope, so they'll have to be terraced. It's nicely screened off from the road with a dry stone wall and some hedging, and there are a couple of young apple trees as well. So there you have it. That's what the property looks like at the moment. In a couple of years, I imagine it'll look very different, but this is my starting point. I have so many plans of things that I want to get started on. I need to make a list and prioritize. One of the things I'm going to do first is set up a 4-bay composting system so that I have somewhere to put all of the prunings and the trimmings I'm going to have to do in the garden when the weather starts to turn. And the earlier I get started on the compost, the more compost I will have in the spring when it comes to setting up my garden beds, and the less money I'll have to spend at the garden centre, which I am 100% on board with. So there are so many things I want to get started with. If you have any thoughts on things you think I should include on the property, I'm thinking about maybe putting in a pond. I mentioned I'm going to build a chicken coop. Yeah, I'm open to suggestions and thoughts and ideas and feedback. And if you think I've made a ridiculous mistake, then I'm also open to hearing that too. Thank you very much for watching. If you're interested in keeping up with my adventures as I start to renovate this cottage and build a backyard homestead from scratch, then click the subscribe button, and I will see you next weekend.